Before Rome had heroes, it had demons. A man stood as the leader of a defeated city-state. He stood before the altar of Baal with his oldest son, and there he made his oldest son swear a vow before the pantheon of gods, that he would never be a friend to the Roman. That son would later rise to prominence among the Carthaginian state, and he would later lead the Second Punic War against the Roman Empire into the heart of Italy itself. And later, young Roman boys would draw fear from the phrase, "Hannibal is at the gates." Thanks to the modern miracle of computers, we can enjoy these ancient battles the way they were meant to be enjoyed, in the safety and comfort of your own home computer. Rome Total War is probably one of my favorite games. Where Shogun and Medieval Total War left off, Rome Total War exceeds all expectations. Where the first two games in the series were effectively 2D sprites on a three-dimensional battlefield, Rome Total War has a completely new engine which allows for each individual character to represent itself, also have mass on the battlefield and its own unique movements. The tactical maps of Rome Total War versus that of Shogun are incredibly different as well. Where in Shogun you had a generic three-dimensional map that represented the said province you were invading, Medieval Total War has a new grid-based system which, wherever you engage an enemy army on the map, there's actually a particular three-dimensional topography there that will allow you to fight in an entirely unique battlefield almost every time, unless you return to said area because it gives you a strategic advantage against your enemy. The battle mechanics of Rome are fantastic as well. It makes every moment of a battle incredibly enjoying to play. At times there can be monotonous moments where you're fighting the same battle over and over again, but then again you can leave it to the computer, but it may not have the same tactical skill as you, or some people like to let the computer do it because it has a bit of a chance to it. But for me, I've always liked the idea of always winning and never losing, which I've pretty much enjoyed throughout the Imperial campaign whenever I play it. And I only lose whenever I want a serious challenge. Or I've seriously ignored the feelings of peasants in a said city, and then it revolts against me and has all the incredible gear from the city, considering it's fully upgraded or something along those lines. I found I'm pretty good at managing the armies in the game, but as far as managing peasants' moods, I've never quite mastered that mechanic in this game. The battle mechanics in Rome are considerably different than they were in Shogun or Medieval, where in Rome Total War there's more of a fluid action to the battlefield, where each of the units have their own type of movements, where there's weight to every single unit in it. Where before, the 2D sprites didn't allow for that same level of individuality that could determine a battle. In Shogun, if you had a unit that was colliding with another one, most likely, if you didn't do something with an entire other unit to fix that situation, that unit would probably break. At least that was my experience with Shogun in the past. The units were a little more fragile, where in this one there's a lot more shock action the units can take, except for Carthaginian light infantry. You literally can blow at them and they probably start retreating. What I've always loved about the Total War series is its ability for alternate history. Lets you take control of an empire at its peak power and completely change its fate. Be that complete collapse because of your own personal mismanagement, or a complete rise to greatness that was never foreseen in history before. My personal favorite faction in Rome Total War would have to be the Carthaginian Empire. Even though Carthage was technically richer and slightly more powerful than Rome at the beginning of the Punic War, I always kind of felt like they were the underdog for some reason. Rome and Carthage were almost natural counters to one another. Where Rome had a superior army, Carthage had a superior navy, so they almost couldn't make headway against one another because of these feats. Where the Romans would destroy a Carthaginian army on land, the Romans couldn't win at sea due to the superior numbers of a Carthaginian fleet with superior training and larger ships. This battle unfortunately depicts something that isn't necessarily realistic. This one occurs on the island of Sicily, where I somehow managed to beat a Roman army in the field, which the Carthaginians really didn't think they could do. So they avoided direct confrontations on land against the Roman army at all costs in the First Punic War, and shifted most of their endeavors to naval battles, where they had the advantage. The Roman army consisted of citizens who trained almost their entire lives to be soldiers part-time. The First Punic War was before the Rome really had a full-time professional army, but the ones they did have were incredible volunteers who trained regularly to be infantry. Carthage did not have that same tradition. What it did have, though, was an excess of money and the ability to recruit mercenaries from all over the Mediterranean world. The tipping point in the conflict occurred, however, when the Romans found a beached Carthaginian ship that had been abandoned after a storm. And the Romans, not having a very good navy themselves, took this ship and dismantled it piece by piece and learned how it went together. And then the Romans effectively made copy after copy of this particular Carthaginian warship, which was one of the best in their fleet. Where the Romans lacked in tactical ability in sea operations, they made up for in their ability to basically be the best infantry in the world. So they brought the infantry battle to the ocean. By putting gigantic drawbridges on the sides of these ships, they would lock with Carthaginian ships, board them, and then fight in series of basically hand-to-hand and gladius-to-face maneuvers that allowed them to capture more Carthaginian ships. As a result of the new Roman navy, Carthage lost its edge. So, unfortunately, it began to lose battle after battle, and the war turned drastically in Rome's favor. And it got so bad to the point in 241 BC that they finally signed a peace treaty with the Romans, forcing their evacuation of Sicily, and the loss of Corsica and some other colonies they had established prior to the war with Rome. With a great loss in territory, it was also forced to pay large indemnities to Rome as well, causing serious financial problems at Carthage at home. And Carthage, having a large mercenary army, found itself in serious trouble. So effectively, after the end of the First Punic War, Carthage found itself with large bands of mercenary soldiers who hadn't been paid in weeks and months, roaming around the countryside causing serious problems, and eventually getting together and causing a large uprising. The events directly after the First Punic War shaped a lot of Carthaginian policy later. What ended up happening was you had two competing schools of thought. You had one school, a conservative school, led by that of Hanno the Great, an individual who earned his title by fighting other tribes in Africa, not necessarily winning against the Romans. And then you had Hamilcar Barca, the other side of the equation, who decided that fighting the Romans was the most important thing Carthage should do, because of the threat it caused and represented to their future. Hanno the Great held more favor with the old aristocracy of Carthage, because Hamilcar had basically negotiated the treaty with Rome, which a series of events and things allowed for the Romans to not rectify the treaty properly in the first place and allowing them to ask for more war indemnities later, which Hamilcar was blamed for, which ultimately resulted in the mercenary uprisings in Libya. Hamilcar still held favor in Carthage because of his ability to destroy the mercenary armies that rose against the Carthaginian state. Ironically, most of the mercenaries who rose against Hamilcar in Carthage were actually trained by Hamilcar himself. But at this point in Carthaginian history, much of the aristocracy in Hanno had no interest in continuing conflict with Rome. So Hamilcar took his forces and himself and went to the Iberian Peninsula, now Spain, where he secured massive silver and gold mines and fortified his army. Hamilcar, however, died in battle around 21 BC, leaving a bit of a power vacuum that was filled by his son-in-law, until his son-in-law was eventually assassinated by a Celtic assassin. But that power vacuum allowed for the sons of Hamilcar to rise to power and prominence within Iberia, Hannibal becoming the main governor of the region. With the death of Hamilcar, Rome had lulled itself into a false sense of security, believing that the sons of Hamilcar wouldn't be nearly as threatening as Hamilcar himself. Rome had defeated and successfully enclosed its northern territory, thinking it was secure, but that would prove something that was nearly impossible against the likes of Hannibal.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore's keeping up with you.